Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Crysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. This week, I'm excited to welcome Chad Bareither. Chad is the principal consultant at the Bareither Group Consulting and author of Improve Less, a book about focus and the focus and align framework, which helps leaders narrow their strategy, stay aligned, and deliver sustainable results. He's worked with everyone from small businesses to Fortune 500s, helping them focus on what truly matters. Chad, thanks so much for joining us on the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Oh, I appreciate the invite. Good to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. I know we've been connected for a while across social media, and always appreciate your outlook on operations and in specific to manufacturing, but even more broadly than that. And excited to talk to you today about helping those folks that are out there kind of stabilize cost, expand their capacity, and obviously grow profitability in their businesses. So, just to kick things off, I'd love to talk a bit about the book because I think it sets a great tone. I love the title of it. What was the, kind of genesis behind this idea of improve less? Because I'm sure it catches people off guard.
Yeah, so the title itself came after the book was written, honestly, right? I was brainstorming with my publishing strategist. Shout out to Corey Kirby. But I started writing the book because I was engaging with a few clients, and at the time growing the business, I was doing something different for each client. Now, so for one client, I'm teaching and developing skills in problem solving. For another one, I'm helping them, clarify and deploy strategy. And for a third one, how do we get, our finger on the pulse of daily management of our operations? And it just so happens when they got good at one of those things, they needed the other one. So great, we're good at problem solving. Are we strategically aligning what we're solving? Good, we're good at daily management. We can find problems. Do we have the capability to solve them? Good, we understand our strategy. How do we actually change the processes that get us where we want to go? So I took a step back and just said, if I started from zero, what would be the ideal process I would take a new client through? So it's that 5-step framework of first identifying why are we thinking about changing the business at all? So quantify what good looks like, kind of a milestone toward that mission and vision. And then the hard work is how. So then we really narrow down and say, we don't need to do it all. For example, I have a client that's we want to shorten our lead time by 20%. Great. If we can do that with one project, we're going to do one project. If it takes 10, it takes 10, but we're not just going to keep everyone busy. And so that was really the heart of the focus and align framework, as I came back as I'm coming back and with my publishing strategy and say, what I'm really telling people is actually do less than they're doing today. So improve fewer things at one time. And we kind of landed on this improve less because it's a juxtaposition of terms versus continuously improve or improve more.
Yeah. Well, it's the thought process of, you got to slow down to speed up, right? It's saying the same thing in a different way that hopefully resonates with people, because ultimately, and to your point of, how do we not just kind of set the vision and, why now and, what are some of those factors, right? But it really is about doing the most important work and doing that in a way that aligns ultimately with that vision. So how do you help leaders, kind of navigate that, right? Because I'm in the same boat. I see a lot of clients, a lot of conversations about, well, we tried this, well, we did this over here, and to varying degrees. So maybe it would be helpful for folks if we could, unpack that a bit more in terms of how do we, as continuous improvement people, folks that have been doing this stuff for a long time, how do we tend to, be able to to get up to that 30,000 foot view to say, here's how we should be prioritizing. Here's how we can maybe allocate some resources. And what are the steps beyond just, here's this tool set that we have to deploy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, the tool set is helpful after we know how we're going to get there, right? So then we can enable people to apply those tools on the focused areas. But even before that, so depending upon the size of the organization, right, it's often that top, the leader, whatever their title is, CEO, president, something like that, plant manager, and their team are not aligned on what needs to change. So they might say, let's say something like cost savings. And cost savings isn't a dirty word. I think we look a lot in business and we think like that's just to line leaders' pockets or whatever. Cash is the lifeblood of business. And if we don't have cash flow, like the business is at risk along with all those jobs and all the suppliers that we buy from. So just trying to be realistic that we operate in this ecosystem, getting leadership aligned on, is cost savings the top thing? Let's say it is, then why? Can we actually describe that to our people as something more inspiring than save money? So for example, a client we're working with is, they have a very aggressive cost savings goal, but it's because they're planning a strategic investment, either expanding into a new product line or an acquisition of a peripheral business. So that's good. Tell the people, get your leadership team aligned and we're trying to reduce costs to make the business better. That's the first thing of
because...
oh man, why did it take us 2 weeks for someone to say that? Now it's a little bit more inspiring for me to say, I'm saving dollars, not for some arbitrary target that I have. I'm saving dollars to get to this target because it's supporting this business to being better in the future. Kind of getting back to the tools, the hard work, the whatever you want to say, the hard skills of applying the tools is great. But oftentimes the business might not even be ready for saying, let's 5S everything. And people are like, why the heck are we doing that? Right. It's if you back up and you can give them something aspiring, something inspiring to look at, it's well, now I'm actually invested in changing the way I manage my business on a daily basis. Now I'm invested in problem solving and changing our processes to get better results. Now I'm invested in that strategic destination that we're going after. And maybe that sounds a little bit too altruistic, but over a dozen engagements now, I'd say we have found it to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, too often we kind of either get sidetracked or stop short. I talk a lot about this perspective from my time as a leader and making poor decisions and doing all of these things, right? I used to do all this stuff. That's how I know we shouldn't do it, because it took me a really long time to figure out, what worked and how to get people, kind of on your side and all rallying around some sort of idea, right? And the idea was, how do we improve this business, right? So I love that. And, one of the things I share with people, which kind of, is in a similar vein, is the fact that everybody has their day job, right? So often we get sidetracked or we're, focused on some new thing. And so in the midst of these larger projects or initiatives, sometimes we fail to just give the update of hey, we're still working on this. This is still moving forward. There's not been any progress, right? Mm-hmm. Or limited progress. Here's why, right? But, this isn't something that's going away, because again, getting back to tying this work to the people that are closest to and adjacent to, right? Those direct and indirectly impacted folks, that's how this stuff gets done. And I think sometimes that is, I don't want to say missed, but I think that we sometimes as leaders overlook just how impactful and important that is. So what do you see from your perspective in these client engagements? How are you having those conversations at the leadership level to, as I would say, I'm the bridge builder, right? Between that vision and what actually happens, because they both want the same thing, but they have a hard time articulating that to each other. So I'd love to get your perspective on that.
All right, I gotta, so I don't lose track. I gotta make notes because we got to get back to the the change management and the update thing, because it's something good there. But by way of getting back to there, so another element of this improve less concept is, I am confident some of your listeners have experienced the fact of you're talking about like stuff gets sidetracked. Like we have so much going on that it gets pushed to the back burner. Well, it's not too difficult a concept to grasp to say, if we were doing less, would we get more of that stuff done? Right?
Yeah.
So like if we think about a lot of businesses operate and they'll develop, whether or not they do a strategic planning cycle, oftentimes it's a year. So we feel like we have to have a lot of stuff because we have 12 months to get it done. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be like Debbie Downer here, but we're recording at the end of May. It's almost June. Like we're getting to the halfway point in the year. That probably felt like it was a long ways away when it was January. And so we have this perception of like, we can do a lot in a year. And it's like, well, why don't we just prioritize that and only start a few things, have a few active projects going on and drive them to completion. The phrase I use with a lot of clients is like how much change can you metabolize? Like if you just say we're going to do, let's take some round numbers, right? And I'm going to do one project. So there's going to be 5 to 8 members on the team. And they're going to be working on it 4 hours a week. Manageable. We're going to do 10 projects. You're going to have 80 people in your business tied up 4 to 10 hours a week. Like, how big is your business?
Product.
You're like, it's 200 people. You can afford to give up 45% of your workforce. Like, I'm not sure that's going to work. Right. So like, why don't we just start slower? The other thing about starting slower, starting with less, is for the frontline operators that really need to have the buy-in and see the value of this to be committed. Like if they don't see something change for 7 months instead of 6 weeks, like a lot of these projects, if we just focused on that, you can knock it out in 6 weeks. A client that we're working with right now is like one of the top projects that we identified. It was done in 6 weeks, like done in 6 weeks. And so like, that's the way to create a little bit of momentum and buy-in. Say, well, that was great. Here's this other problem. Can we fix that in a couple of weeks? Versus, oh, I don't know. It's a big to do and it takes months and months and not a lot of progress is made. So that's good to say. If we can get focused, we can be clear, then it's easier to prioritize. Then when it's easier to prioritize, it's easier to focus.
Yeah.
And to your point, we do need to run the business. We do need to ship product. We do need to serve customers and everything else. So there will be times where there's not an update on the project. It's a long segue or return back to your thing about updating. A friend of mine and great author and amazing speaker, Cassandra Worthy, wrote a book called Change Enthusiasm. And she talks in there a lot about like provide an update, even if there's no update, like keep talking about it. And Rich Sheridan, who's the CEO of Menlo Innovations over on your side of the state, often says his job is actually CRO, Chief Repeating Officer. Like he just hits the strategy, and that's it. Here's the strategy. This is what we're doing about it. Like keep it front of mind for everyone.
Yeah.
But that's also why we need to make progress. If I'm going to be talking about how important this is and like nothing changes for months, people just get sick of hearing about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge to kind of balance those things. But to your point, right, like shortening that planning cycle, moving from annual to quarterly, those types of activities, having a formalized kind of project management or continuous improvement, and like, again, you call it whatever you want, right? But let's formalize what we're doing, right? Like, let's have some project visibility. Let's have the ability to, assign tasks so we don't lose visibility over who's ultimately responsible for these different aspects to move this thing forward. I got into this great conversation the other day about, not everything needs to be a meeting, right? Like, and that's not a new concept either, but it applies here as well. So, and I'd love to get your take on this. I think so often in that want to share the narrative of what's happening, we pull everybody together into these meetings where we would probably get more progress done if we formalized, kind of what's the output, right? Like who needs what information disseminated to them and how, and then put that into a process that followed that particular project, right? So I'd love to get your take on that, because I thought it was a good conversation the other day that set it up.
Yeah. So if we start off with the fact of you said like who's going to be like the project management office or whatever. Well, I'm going to be speaking more to small and mid-market organizations right now, right? Is like, well, in large organizations, why do we need that? Because we have so much going on. Well, so here's an idea. Do less, and then you don't need like someone to manage it all. Like if you had fewer projects to keep track of, you could just do it as part of your daily management system. Right? If I don't have 15 improvement projects and transformation, initiatives going on, like we can just keep it front of mind and be like, yeah, those ones are not started yet, back burner. These are the 5 that are active. I don't need to build like infrastructure and overhead to manage all of the change. It's just part of our business. So that's kind of the first thing I think about, like organizations. And don't get me wrong. So Fortune 500, scale companies, large organizations, it's very complex. There are changes that need to happen at the same time. So you do need someone coordinating it. Got it. When you get smaller, it's like if you're doing so much that you can't keep track of it, maybe try doing less so you don't actually need a dedicated project manager. Then the other thing about so if you have a lot going on and everything needs to be a meeting, I'm going to assume some of your listeners are familiar with the RACI model. It's RACI, an acronym that stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed. And when I coach organizations on this, I put a very important word in there, is like the consulted and informed is like, who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed, not like wants to. So everyone wants to be consulted, right? Yeah. I want my voice in this decision. It's like, do we really need to ask everyone? Like if we're going to change our marketing collateral, like, is that relevant to fill in the blank function within the organization? And the same thing with informed. So you have a lot of folks that go to meetings, and I'm thinking of a larger client that I've been on engagement with for a while. It's like you get in this habit where people come to meetings, they open their laptop and they tune out. It's like this meeting is pointless because there's 2 people having a conversation. Everyone else is checking email.
Yeah.
So like when we do project updates, when we do with our clients, when we do project updates, when we do daily management meetings, it's like laptops closed, phones off. We're going to make this as efficient as possible. And if you're like no value to me, that's fine. Like you don't have to be here.
Yeah.
So that's my feeling on, does everything need to be a meeting? Because we need to get more specific about, well, who really needs to be in this conversation? Who needs to help make the conversation? Who needs to be informed because it's going to affect their job? Not who wants to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah. No, completely agree. I mean, a couple of comments there, like on the project management side, totally agree with that. I think sometimes even in smaller companies that it's not so much, formalizing like a PMO, but to your point about having visibility from a daily management perspective and being able to speak on, what are the actions being taken? How are we actually moving this thing forward? What's the impact, kind of at the ground level and then up? Because I've seen, some relatively small businesses that don't have 50 projects, but have 5 and, still struggle to communicate effectively, still struggle to get, some actual momentum and some quick wins built up. So, maybe let's talk about that a bit too, from your perspective in terms of like that daily management, building that in at the kind of lowest level, the lowest common denominator. How are those conversations going with the folks that you're working with? What are some of the roadblocks that you hear, directly from the floor or from leadership as well? And then ultimately, right, like how do we get some, buy-in and momentum building for these folks?
Yeah. So I'll speak to a active engagement right now. And, but I think I'll try to generalize some of the feedback to what we hear across industries is, so here's one thing, like that doesn't matter to me. or we can't control that. So the first thing is, well, are what I'm asking the front line to report on and to track daily, one, something that matters to them? And then perhaps more importantly, like, can they do something about it?
Yeah.
So if I don't have the authority, the autonomy, the resources, whatever, to actually change that value, like, I'm just reporting the weather. Like, well, it's going to be cold again today. Nothing we can do about it. Right. So then it's disengaging. It's like, why am I wasting my time on this? Right. So when we have metrics oftentimes that are like cascaded sounds like it just happens, like pushed, like forced down and saying like,
right,
this is what daily management is. And this is what it's going to look like. Like, we need to, like, I'll say at least me and my team with our clients, we need to get the front line to actually be pulling on that. So here we go. Here's our first like lean principle, like pull versus push, right? If I push it down and say, okay, here's your new, company branded whiteboard and your SQDC metrics that you're going to measure and what you're going to do, I can teach them to do it. But like, if they didn't have a voice in creating that, it's a lot longer lead time for buy-in. So what we do is we develop it with them and saying like, hey, this is the concept that we're trying to do. Everyone needs to understand that we have a good day. Everyone needs to understand like what a good day means. So in this particular engagement, that's our first day on site. We're just observing their work. We're making connections, understand how long you've worked here. What do you do here? What's the best part about your job? What do you not like about your job? What's one thing, if you could, had a magic wand, it could change? And then we're asking questions like, how do you know if you had a good day? Right. And generally it starts with something like, if we were busy, it's like, okay. Right. Or if we got everything done, or we don't run out of parts. So these general things, but like nothing you can put your finger on and be like, put a number to that. So then we get some of those individuals in a room and start saying like, collectively, like, what's the, not to use too many sports analogies, right? But what's the scoreboard we'd put up, right? So this is in Metro Detroit. So we're like, baseball season, like there's a Tigers scoreboard. Like what numbers go on your scoreboard to say whether you won or lost today? And then, man, it just opens up. We should do this. We should do that. I don't know about this. And now they're polling, right? They're polling on it. They're polling on numbers that probably leadership, in this case, this particular engagement, leadership had already pushed down, and like they're sending them reports, but no one's opening it.
Yeah.
So it's like, now we get some pull and engagement, and they want it. Now, when they want to talk about it, now you get to the next step of eventually you will have a problem, right? Because eventually something will happen. Now you can introduce another concept like, well, what about some problem solving? What about some standardization or some other tools? But like leading with, say, a classroom training about, well, Toyota does daily management, so you should too. Like, I don't care, right?
Yeah, it's always the the chicken and the egg, right? Like leadership is always looking for those. The best way I can say that is like when I was sitting in those seats, often the way I got myself into trouble with this stuff was because I was so enamored by this problem. And so I was spending all of my time working towards solving this problem. And, even when I was doing that in a team setting, it was often at the leadership level. So what would inevitably happen, right, is that you jump right over the why and the what, and you'd skip right to the how, because you had already worked yourself through the why and the what of, what's even going on, right? So it's that whole thing where, again, to your point, when we push that down from a leadership perspective, wouldn't you be shocked that, people aren't gung-ho about, figuring out how we're actually going to do this? It's like, I shared this with you before, we hit record, right? But it's like, just because you say there's a deadline and you want it to happen by then, there's no way to will it to happen, right? Like you cannot say, it's this. You have to you have to let people come up to that and collectively figure out how we're going to get to that point. And that's where the magic happens, right? Like, sure, you can do some top-down stuff. I grew up in a company that was top-down. It was my parents' company. So I'm very familiar with how that, narrative works. And it did for a long time. And it still does, right? Like you can find all kinds of organizations that operate that way. But if you really want to talk about kind of holistic change, sustainable growth, and sustainable growth growth, how I think you and I would define it, that's, you can't do that, right? Like you can do it for a period of time, but, capturing market share, kind of covering these, exponential cost increases, right? Like, using that as a leverage point to capture more market share, right? Like that stuff you cannot do, without doing the things that we're talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, not to be too altruistic, right? We talked about this before. It's like it has to have value, and it does. Every engagement, it ends up having some value. But I've simplified back down and just said, whatever you want to call it, Lean Six Sigma, operational excellence. Right? I don't want to get any of the zealots like hackles all up on their neck, but whatever. We'll just say operational excellence should make people's lives easier. If it's easier to do my job, I am going to do a better job. That's like basic math. And so when you're working with a team, we always deploy a tool in a problem-based approach. Not like, well, the best organizations have 5S on their floor, so you should 5S too. Like we would 5S if that was the problem. Wow, we seem to have lost a lot of time looking for tools. Like, would it be great if they were all in the right place? And then like, how would you lay it out? Like, let's show the employee how the tool fixes a problem. Now I have buy-in because now it's like, guys, I use this tool and my life is easier now. And will the metrics get better? Sure, they will. So in back to this engagement that we're on is like, there is a problem that we're trying to solve. Here's the problem with that problem. The issue that we're trying to get over is like, they don't see it as a problem yet. Great. Yep. So we need to walk with them at the point in the journey that they are, give them a tool. So this first tool is just operating reviews, right? Give them a metric and a visual to talk about on a regular basis. Sooner or later, like the switch is going to flip and they're going to say it's a problem. And it's like, oh, it is a problem. What should we do? And then we can kind of take this step with the next tool. But I have not seen it sustainable in an organization where we kind of lead with the tool and expect the entire staff to synthesize that knowledge and be like, wow, I learned that tool in the classroom and it solved the problem. They're just doing the tool because they were told to do it. And so that's the approach that we take. It seems to be working. And so we're going to keep on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up like 5S, right? And there's a lot of folks that will obviously lead with that. And as I say, most of us see a problem through the lens of our experience. So if you've only been involved in 5S types of projects, right? Like, sure, it's easy to see the value and benefit of that. But one of my favorite 5S stories was we're working with a small manufacturer. And, so as we were starting to talk about some of the different options, how to solve some of the problems, it was inevitably came to 5S. And one of the comments from one of the guys was like, well, we can't do that. Like we can't find stuff now. You want to just put it out there where everybody could go and, like steal my stuff. It's like, all right, well, okay. Fair enough. We got to take a step back here because we're obviously, dealing with some other issues to unpack, right? So it's back to this whole thought process where if you don't make it meaningful for the people that are both directly and indirectly impacted, right? Like none of it matters. You can do the shadow boards, you can fill in the blank, right? Like I'm just picking on 5S, but you can do the stuff, right? Like you can follow the steps. Ultimately, it's going to fizzle out at some point. You're not going to get enough, actual buy-in and actual progress to then go and take that to another level, if you will, or to implement another tool or to solve another problem, all of those things. So one of the things I'd love to get your perspective on, because, I know you've worked both in smaller companies and larger companies. So, I think there's a bit of a misnomer when you're a small company thinking that, the big companies really have this stuff figured out. And, so I'd love to get your perspective on that, having worked in both environments. I've shared my story on that. So, but I'd love to hear your take and, kind of maybe tie those problem sets together, if you will.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest one challenge in a bigger company is consistency, right? So how do we do it similar or the same in multiple organizations without a little bit of top-down push? So I don't want to say it's, how should we phrase this, David? Is it required, or is it expected, or just expedited? But at a certain point, like when you're operating in an enterprise, there is the consideration that we found this best practice, and now we're gonna share that new standard across the organization. So some change does happen to you because we found a better way. And I think that's one of the challenges in a large organization, is that you're going to have numerous leaders that are at various degrees of buy-in that are expected to deploy some of these principles, methods, and tools. In a small organization, right, there's kind of fewer hearts and minds to change. So you can kind of be patient and move at the pace of the learner, if you will. And then once you have the zealot, like, it's not going away. But I think that is a challenge in a large organization. You had 5S. So I'll bite. I'll show my 5S story here. Large organization. We're doing 5S. So we're going to get a Kaizen team together that's going to do a 5S. I want to be clear for all the listeners out there. I was not on this team, right? So it's a machining shop. So it's a bunch of 5-axis mills and 3-axis milling machines. So they're making complex machine parts, and they conduct the 5S over the weekend while the operators are not there. And so,
surprise.
Does it look beautiful? It looks beautiful. The operators came in on that first shift on Monday, and they were just like, where are my tools? Right? And then you have some people who are not experts, and they're like, well, that's great, but I need this specific tool to change a collet or whatever. Like, what? Yeah. Where is? So then we created just a bunch, and then you have disengagement of like, this stuff doesn't work. Yeah. So while I understand at some point you have to move fast because you're trying to standardize, you're trying to commonize, a challenge in a big organization is like, well, how fast can you move? And like, how many things do you need to standard versus allow for regional or site variation within it? Now, I'll contradict that story with another thing. So this same organization, I had the good fortune of being on their continuous improvement team, their global team. So we were responsible for trying to harmonize the production system in various locations. So when we went to standard layouts for some of our tiered management boards, when we went to standard report out templates, both one pager and presentations for any of the Kaizen events, I personally was in events in numerous different countries or virtually listening into them in German and French and Spanish, and I mean, Irish is technically English, but hard to understand sometimes. And like, I know what's going on. Like, I can follow the entire, because it's a standard and I can see the metric, and it's like, it's easier to digest. So just making back to making people's lives easier is like making it easier for leadership to support in those organizations, because those middle layer of leadership is just crucial in deploying and sustaining this, because the bigger the organization, your top level leadership just gets further away from the frontline value contribution. So it's super important to make sure that you're communicating effectively through those teams and giving them the right tools so they can feel successful. Yeah, I hope I stayed on point of what you were asking.
No, I think it's good. To the point of, it's all challenging, right? Like, I think when you're a smaller business with visions of, whether it's increased market share or, additional capacity through capital investment or acquisition, right? I think sometimes smaller companies have this thought that, the big companies are doing these things, right? And, I think AI is a great, right? Like, a bit off topic, but I think it's a great kind of use case for where I was going with the question. And it's just, everybody says, like, just because there's, headlines about people implementing this stuff, like, I know because I'm in conversations with folks every day about these things. Like the reality is, there are very limited use cases. There's a whole host of complexity around it, right? And just because people are talking about it doesn't mean they're doing it well. And I think that this is a topic that kind of businesses on both sides can take lessons from, because when you're a smaller business, you look to those, maybe industry leaders or just larger organizations thinking like, oh, they've got all these things going. They're just crushing it. They're doing all of the right stuff. And in reality, right, like it's just, they've got more resources, but it's a different problem to solve, because now you're very disconnected. You've got to figure out how do you do these things more, across an organization that could span time zones, could span, countries and continents, right? Like a whole host of other issues you're not even thinking about. So, like my whole point is just focus on where you're at, where you want to go, and how do we, communicate that vision effectively, and then look for these opportunities to start to deploy some of the tool set to help us get there. Because, we can improve less. We can, have more focused or concentrated efforts. But at the end of the day, this is a journey, right? Like this isn't just a set it and forget it. This isn't, I will this to happen and so it be, right? Like, right? Like this stuff is a living, breathing thing. And if we don't pay attention to it, if we don't put effort and resource into it, we're not going to be successful with it in the long term, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, hard to believe that we've already burned through nearly 40 minutes. And so I'll start to land the plane. But, great conversation, Chad, and would love to have you back on because, we're barely scratching the surface of this stuff. But before we kind of land this plane, is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to cover or think that's, super important for folks out there that are listening to this to be thinking about, to be kind of concerned with? Any of those types of topics, would love to get your take on.
Yeah, I think any of the topics we covered so far, so improve less or improve more, or use AI or use 5S, is like in any of these things, the biggest thing I can encourage people on is like try and be transparent about. So back to like communicating, staying focused and aligned, being transparent with your people of why you're trying to do something different. And then also like kind of leaning into the mistakes. So like Mark Graven wrote a great book, like My Favorite Mistake, of just saying like, you're not going to get it perfect the first time, and just being transparent with that about your people, about we're trying to change the way we do business, as long as you can communicate that why, that future vision. But you got to start somewhere, and like no one learns to ride a bike without getting their knee scraped, right? No one learns how to play an instrument without sucking at first. No one learns how to transform their business without making a couple of missteps. So it's okay, but you can't listen to this podcast. You can't read a book. You can't, do a benchmarking visit and then all of a sudden be like, I got to figure it out. You got to try.
I love that. And I'm only chuckling because, the whole reason that I can do this is because it's been nearly 30 years of doing this, right? Like it's all of the poor decision making as, a young leader that thought they knew way more than they actually did, right? It's that practical application. It's the cycle of improvement. It's trying things. It's, wanting to communicate yet not knowing what really is effective communication, right? Like, okay, we want to do this because, right? Like finish the sentence. Okay. Yeah. Like all of those different aspects. So I really love that. For anybody that's out there that wants to get a hold of you, Chad, and have a conversation, where's the best place for them to find you at?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Company also posts to Facebook. If you want to set up some time, introductory call, you can go to our website, bareithergroup.com. And there's a link there to just schedule a phone conversation. So those would be great ways if you want to talk more.
Perfect. And I'll make sure to put that stuff in the show notes for everybody. Chad, thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate what you do.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Crysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Crysler.